Welcome to Preshift, tidbits of wisdom for everyday service. My name is TJ Griffin. I'm the corporate wine educator for Winebow. We encourage your questions at any point during the webinar, but please use the Q&A rather than the chat bar. Let me introduce your host, Master Sommelier Ron Edwards is the husband of one wife, the father of 5 girls, a surfer and missionary kid. He has almost 30 years of hospitality experience, and since 2018, he has been the director of wine education for Winebow. And now, here to discuss today's topic, maximizing your pre-shift, Master Sommelier, Ron Edwards.
Good morning, TJ.
Good morning.
It's a great morning in Richmond. How is it where you are?
It's a little cloudy, a little drizzly, but not too bad.
Well, you know, if you have to be inside working, it might as well be questionable weather outside, right?
Yes. You don't
It
feel
makes it feel a little better. All right, so yeah, pre-shift. We're going to talk about pre-shift on pre-shift. Of course we should, right?
Well, I figured it was going to come at some point.
You probably should have come probably should have been the first episode, but I've never been known to follow the the normal process for things. So let's talk about the idea that spawned the title of this webinar, and that is that moment in time that almost all hospitality businesses have. And you know, I think there's probably a few retail establishments out there that get their employees together periodically to also share what the priorities are and what's going on in their own world. And if you are running a retail establishment and you are trying to win the war of retail on customer service, because price is really hard to win that battle anymore with the exposure of the internet to everybody's pricing, I think that you would be well served to start a pre-shift process to keep people engaged in customer service and to help them figure out what the priorities are for your business. TJ, you ever work at a retail establishment that had little meetings?
No, my retail experience is limited, but I've observed some, but they tend to be more, the ones I've observed tend to be more spur of the moment. For example, when I was a sales rep and I would bring in a wine to the buyer and they decided they liked it and they were going to bring it in, they would call over the associates to taste it. So it was more impromptu. I've never seen a formal pre-shift meeting. It's so closely associated with on-premise, but it's just as valuable off-premise, I would imagine. If
you design it as such, right? Everything that we do for our businesses has the value of the effort put in and the purposefulness behind it. And so, you know, if you're a retail manager or owner out there in the audience, then, and you haven't done this, sit down and think about it for a little while and figure out if the principles that I'm about to lay out apply to what you're trying to accomplish. And if not, what would? Because I think it really matters. I know that one of the large retail chains out there have regular team training sessions, but that isn't quite the same as getting everybody together right before the doors open and go down a process of reminding people where we're heading today. And so, you know, today I want to talk through some things that I don't think are going to surprise anybody. I hesitate to say any of them are new ideas because I sincerely doubt it. But what I do intend to do is remind us of some principles and some processes that we often push aside in honor of perhaps a more urgent priority. I think that real priorities don't have a sense of urgency often. It's more the nature of hospitality being, even when you plan it well, there's still fires to put out every day. And so pre-shift and that really valuable time right before guest service begins often gets pushed aside or compromised by some other incident that's gone on that day or happens at that moment. And so I'm hoping to remind us all the value and maybe throw some new ideas at you about how to make it even more effective for you and your team in the process. And so off we go. You ready, TJ?
I am ready.
All right. So, you know, we should know, why are we doing this? Because I have consulted for some organizations that they really weren't in the habit of doing a pre-shift meeting. It wasn't part of their game plan. And so in their case, why should we do this would probably be the next question. And I would tell you that a pre-shift meeting, call it what you want in your business, is a critical piece of success. And the reason it's a critical piece of success, maybe it's obvious to you, maybe it's not, is that it's a simple opportunity and it's a daily opportunity to live into the idea of the way both hospitality and retail really work, but especially hospitality. Training and education never stops in our industry. Never. Wines come and go, vintages change, menus change, staff turnover is always an issue in the hospitality and retail trade. The retail focus of a retail business adjusts with seasons and timeframes. The client buying patterns are not stagnant. What people were buying 5 years ago in most restaurant establishments is not exactly the same as it was 5 years ago, maybe not even as 18 months ago. And there is never time to catch up. You will never find time in the future to make up for training opportunities that you did not take today. It just doesn't happen. The world keeps moving. Everything keeps changing. And to try and go backwards and catch up on all the things that you should have taught your staff, should have communicated to your staff, should have focused on is gone. It just doesn't come back. And so if you ignore it, you're going backwards in a hurry. So that is why we are doing this. We're doing this to stay current, to stay sharp. And if your goal is to be a great hospitality business, a great customer service retail focus, then you have to do training. You have to find ways to be better than your competitors at taking care of your customers. And most important aspect of taking care of your customers are your frontline employees. If they are not fully prepared to transfer your vision as the owner through to the guest or the client in your business with consistency, then you are missing out on some of your greatness. And that's just hard to do once a month.
And Ron, it's just because you can't catch up doesn't, you're not saying that it's too late to start. It's never too late to start this or to overhaul it or to improve it.
Correct. It's never too late to start. And it's just a reminder that once you start, you'll start to see immediate improvement. You really will. You'll see things changing at a rate that you maybe even didn't expect, because you had gotten complacent, or because you had gotten, honestly, in the last 18 months of the world, it could be relatively easy to get into a hopeless thought process. Or even, I'm, especially at the retail game, because everything shifted to retail, it could be that we are so overwhelmed, we don't have time for this. And that certainly becomes an issue. But no, it's never too late to start. Just because you slipped off and started, paying attention to other things is not a reason to stop altogether or to not start up again. So thank you for clarifying that. I wouldn't want people to walk away thinking, well, it's too late. I'm not going to start.
Well, I think a lot of people get paralyzed by inertia. They're like, we've been doing it this way. It's too late for me to do it now. And as you said, that is not true.
No, yeah. And that's a great way to put it, paralyzed by inertia. And, that inertia in our lives is one of the major factors that keeps us from moving into a process of improvement and a different cycle than we're in at the moment. So when is completely based on the business model, right? When do we do this? But there are some obvious times to choose, right? 30 minutes before service is something that I recommend, but that we'll get into this as we go, but 30 minutes before service, the most common, at least in the hospitality trade, is probably 15 minutes before the doors open, so to speak. And then you could do other things. One of the things that we have to remember is that in our modern world, when we do something is no longer dictated by physical presence. So, that traditional manager, service staff standing in the dining room, manager or chef and culinary staff standing in the kitchen doing their own pre-shift. Those things traditionally are face-to-face. They are timely right before things really get crazy, and it's a transfer of information. The reason I say 30 minutes before service is it allows for a more relaxed approach to what's being done, but it requires everybody in the process to agree that that 30 minutes is going to have 15 minutes taken out of it, when most people might be used to finishing up their initial side work. They might still be setting up tables. They might still be setting up the bar. And on the culinary team, in really creative restaurants, sometimes they're finalizing the menu in that last 30 minutes because they're finishing up writing up the featured items. They know what they are, but they haven't actually put them on paper or something like that. Whereas if you push that into 15 minutes prior to service, it is very likely that on a regular basis, some sort of little emergency or interruption will happen before you finish your process. Maybe a guest walks in and sits down at a table, and then somebody who needed to have that information transfer gets pulled away. So TJ, in your restaurant experience, because I know you worked in restaurants and bars, what was the norm in your experience?
Yeah, it was generally a quick 15 to 20 minutes beforehand, go over the specials. Sometimes there was a new wine. Sometimes you'd have a distributor sales rep come through and do a wine training. So it was different experiences, but yeah, people are getting pulled away. People are doing side work. Someone just got sat. The kitchen wasn't ready, and it was often chaotic. And I like the idea of planning for more time than you might need to make it a little less, a little more relaxed, and maybe retain some more information.
Great, and we're gonna talk about some of the hows and the whats here in just a minute. But so those of you who are running this in a physical way, where you're right in front of your people, I recommend finishing this and then sending them back into the world of their side work, mise en place for service, etc., because it gives you time to have everybody together before they get pulled away. And then there's this other idea that I want to bring up, and that is, in our increasingly digital world, we can do this throughout the day. It doesn't have to just be 30 minutes before service. What do you think about that, TJ?
Yeah, I saw in the I guess is it overly ambitious to call them show notes? I saw in the show notes for today you were talking about digital applications, and yeah, the possibilities are fantastic. I was even thinking, what if you were really on top of things as manager and you sent out something for the next day's staff? So be familiar with this by the time you get here, and we'll go over it together and blah blah blah. That would be really cool.
Yeah, and it can be done. It does require what we should be doing anyway. If we are really trying to hit excellence in our businesses, greatness in our businesses, then that takes upfront effort. Always takes upfront effort. It takes planning. It takes forethought. And so if you want your pre-shift, if you want your information sharing, if you want that to be dialogue driven, if you want it to be less static and more engaged, it also requires pre-planning. So TJ, your point is really well made. Wouldn't that be amazing? Well, let's talk about how, right? How do we pull this off? Because wouldn't that be amazing is all involved in the, not that it should be done or when it should be done, but it's how we do it and what we're doing while we're there. And so I think there are kind of three skinny options here, right? In the new world. And that would be to go fully old school. We only do this face to face, and we only do it in the building before the doors open. The other would be new school, which would be in honor of the fast-paced world of hospitality. We've moved completely to a digital platform, and we do all of our pre-shift as information that's expected for our team to absorb prior to coming to work or at work while they're doing their side work. because it would be on a digital platform accessible through their phone. And we do live in a world now where almost everyone has some version of a smartphone. And the last, I think, is probably the most effective, and that is the hybrid of both, where you are pre-planning some information for them to share in advance and then covering it again in person where it's then effective because now we're reiterating it. It's sort of like, TJ, this would be akin to the flipping the classroom idea that Khan Academy has made so famous, where he pushes out information to work on at home, and then they come back and then they go through the questions and stuff in person. So yeah, you were about to say something and I kept talking. So
yeah, no, I was thinking the first thing I thought of, and I'm sure there's better apps than this, but I was thinking Quizlet. You could have some quiz questions to get your mind in the right place, to prime the pump, as we talk about sometimes, so that by the time you get there, you're already in the right mindset, and then you go over together.
yeah, I hadn't thought of Quizlet. That would be a very simple one because you're basically sending people a bunch of digital flashcards. But let's talk about the old school concept and how to improve the old school face-to-face traditional 30 minutes, 15 minutes before service. How do we improve that? And I think there's some of the houses, one, you have to have a structure to your meeting, a predictable, expected, consistent structure. We come together at this time. So don't tell me what you're doing, because you shouldn't be doing anything other than standing here at our designated meeting space, everybody together, ready to have pre-shift, whatever time that is, 3:45, 2:30, 9 a.m., whatever it is for the business you're in. But it has to be consistent. And you as the manager and you as a management team have to all get on the same page with this, that this is our structure. We do it at this time to this time, no ifs, ands, or buts, no exceptions. The only thing that's accepting of that is literally the building is on fire and we all have to leave. Other than that, we meet at 3:45 every time. In that meeting, we have a predictable structure. We start with, we start with the menu features of the day from the kitchen, making sure everybody can pronounce all the culinary terms, making sure any definitions that need to be taken care of are taken care of, so that when we say to the guest, yes, this is this has remoulade on it, everybody knows what remoulade is, and how to say it, etc. Maybe in your predictable, consistent meeting, you have a recent review of some social media postings that guests have come back with. Maybe it's Yelp reviews or Twitter responses or Facebook or whatever, digital marketing method you're using to reinforce good things that have happened. You should always have one beverage that you're featuring full information and a tasting on every day. If you want somebody to fully understand your beverage program, you need to talk to them about it every day. If you have 150 wines on your wine list, you should be able to cover all of those wines in a year, one at a time. And then maybe you need to then reiterate one regular menu item to make sure everybody still understands how that everyday menu item is made, how it's pronounced, any of the details, what allergies might be sensitive to it, what food and wine pairing is a magic for it, or beer or cocktails. And then most importantly, in this structure that you're creating, we as management have to stop doing all the talking, because when we do all the talking, our audience becomes passive. Even our most interested audience will become passive because they're not doing the talking. And so in this structure, you need to rotate through your employee base, and each day or week, you're assigning 1 or 2 employees with the responsibility of researching and then discussing in brevity with structure the beverage item that needs to be talked about, or the menu item that needs to be talked about. Because when you place it in a peer-to-peer teaching environment, they are more engaged with each other, and they also know that their turn's coming up pretty soon, so they better pay attention to make sure that they don't look bad when they have their turn. Does that make sense to you, TJ?
Yeah, have a question about that.
Mhm.
Sometimes I'm sure you've come across people that say, I don't like talking in front of people, or I get nervous.
Mhm.
Is this a must do, or an encouraged to do?
I think it's a must do. I mean, if well, let's put this into context, right? My mind is currently in a dining room. If you and I'm talking to my service staff, and if I'm asking them about food and beverage, then I'm talking to one of my um, food and beverage servers. I'm not talking to the bus person or the hostess, right? If the bus person or the hostess is going to present something, it should be fully relevant to their job. Like maybe the hostess is presenting on a regular basis the most important people that are coming in that day, like our weekly regular Tom and Jane are coming in, and make sure that table 18 is ready on time because that's their favorite table and we didn't give it to them last time. That would be something from the hostess. The bus person might be reminding people about best practices for not making the bus person's job harder, or praising them for the last week of, like, you guys did such a great job of pre-busing your tables, thank you so much. I would be assigning information sharing based on role. And if a server tells me they're not comfortable talking to people, I would question, why in the world are you serving tables?
Right. Some logistical questions, real quick.
Mhm.
If you were trying to do a half-hour pre-shift, or allow 30 minutes for pre-shift, and say you open for business at 5, you're not open for lunch. What time do you want the front of the house staff there to start their shift?
That's a great question. And let me clarify, it would be very, very difficult to justify 30 minutes every day for pre-shift. I actually recommend 15. For that main reason, TJ, restaurants and hospitality businesses are already labor heavy. And so to add 30 minutes a day, just because you want to have a long pre-shift, is probably not a very realistic business choice. So I would recommend it as 15 minutes. And if you're opening a door at 5 for first guests, most businesses kind of stagger their opening staff because they realize it depends on the business model, right? A lot of people just aren't busy till 6 o'clock, even though they open at 5. So the openers come in at 3:30, and then the next group of people comes in at 4:15 or 4:30 or whatever. Just make sure that you don't have pre-shift before everybody arrives. So make sure your whole staff is in the building, even if they've just walked in, and then are off to take care of their sections, which will then be closing sections later in the night. Does that make sense?
Sure. And then these two are kind of related. In the real world, sometimes you're limited on space. You don't have a private room necessarily. You can't go outside because it's the middle of winter, and you're open for lunch right through dinner. The kitchen never really closes. How do you get around these sort of logistical challenges to have a good pre-shift?
That is those are great issues. The last restaurant that I consulted for heavily was one of those. They actually served 3 meals a day, TJ, and every shift needed some sort of communication. And the only one that could happen before people were in the building was breakfast. So we would find a little corner in the restaurant that wasn't busy, and we would talk quietly. If there was nobody sitting at the bar, we'd do it there. If there was somebody sitting at the bar, we would move down over where the wine closet was, and just sort of stand closer to each other, or go to a corner of the dining room away from where guests were seated so they didn't feel like we were having a meeting next to their table. Those are just real world things to work around. The important thing is that in a situation like that, even your staff knows it has to be flexible, and they just go looking for you when it's time.
Yeah, so it doesn't have to be a big formal sit-down meeting where everyone's got a pen and paper. It can be, you have to adapt, you have to be flexible.
Yeah,
Depending.
and actually, the whole idea of pen and paper and all of that is not in my mind, actually. I think that if you are reiterating these things as often as possible, they become a very verbal storytelling sort of model. Yes, you want people taking notes on the featured items, and you would love for them to write down the things that you're talking about. But I would consider notes optional at this point. It depends on what you're transferring informationally, I guess.
Makes sense.
And the idea of involving your staff members as the teachers, quote unquote, I will admit to you, I only thought of this as the world's greatest idea after I finished restaurant work. So I'm pointing at myself on this one going, wow, I wish I had implemented that. That would have made a huge difference in the training. And I unfortunately was a bit too much of a control freak and thought I had to share the information every time. And that was just not, it just wasn't the right idea. So if you're out there and you're like me and you're like, but I want it shared right, so I'll do the research and share it myself, you're actually doing yourself a disservice.
We learn so much by teaching others, right?
Correct. And that peer-to-peer information transfer, the research shows over and over again that that sort of, as it's often called, social learning, where people are chatting with each other and having conversations with each other outside of a formal learning environment is so powerful. But that's only going to happen if you empower your staff to go out and do research on their own and then share it. And then all of a sudden, they've done that research, and so they now become sort of the resident expert on that little piece of information. So people come and ask them about it, and then the next person does research and they become the resident expert on that wine or food item or whatever. And so you create this interconnected information sharing network. New school, digital platform. This could be huge. My daughter works in the personal training and exercise industry, and her gym uses a Slack account to communicate among its employees about the members of the gym and personal training clients and what's going on and what is the essential elements of each day of the week. There is a regular communication that happens on the app Slack. And I was thinking to myself, why don't we use this in restaurants and hotels where the entire service team is connected together? So if it's banquet team in the hotel, they have a Slack account. If it's, the fine dining restaurant in the hotel or the breakfast restaurant in the hotel or whatever it is, they would all have their own communication channel where the manager and they can communicate with each other about what's going on. You could use Instagram if you've got the private Instagram account and only have employees on it. You could use Facebook groups because those are private as well. You could use Twitter as long as you don't mind that other people can see it if they go looking for it. And then, of course, there's Teams. Microsoft Teams has kind of taken over the world since COVID started. And maybe you're a larger organization, corporate restaurant account or something like that, and have Teams. Well, give all your employees an account and communicate with them. They can carry that around on their phone too. It's a free app. All of this gives you an opportunity that you can pre-share all of the information that you're trying to keep them up on the day of, or even the week of. Here's our priorities for this week. These are the topics we're going to talk about this week. It does take some preparation, but you know what? If we're going to do great pre-shifts and we're going to have super well informed teams, you have to do the work up front anyway. So if you do the work up front and share it with them, this is a proactive way to manage their expectations, to manage their learning environment and messaging, right? And that's really something we haven't had as a legitimate option until it was kind of forced upon us through COVID, and we should never let it go. All right. So now we know how, or at least we have some ideas of how we should be doing this. Let's talk about what we should be doing while we're there. And the first thing I want to share here is something that I point back at myself now all the time too. And I'm trying to make sure that when I'm doing something, I'm doing it to get engagement instead of just information sharing. It doesn't always work out that way, but I at least want to think about it. And in pre-shift, if you want pre-shift to really be effective, it needs to be an engagement, not an information share, because an information share makes one person the broadcaster and everybody else the receiver, and it becomes a very passive environment. An engaging atmosphere means that there are multiple broadcasters and the audience is not only hearing or writing down the information, but then they're responding to it and engaging in it in a different way. Like maybe the ultimate idea would be one server, for instance, is featured on menu item 7 off the menu about the origin of the dish and what the traditional ingredients were and how we've adapted that in this restaurant. And then somebody else goes, yeah, and I love this wine with it. And then everybody's like, oh, I hadn't thought about that. And it becomes this sort of popcorn information share that's got some control to it, but it's an engaging conversation between all parties. That's our goal, is to walk up to the edge of chaos and stop, where your team is actually talking to each other and engaging with each other while you still get the information across. It needs to be a two-way or multi-way communication. So some things that you should always include. You should always include any and all features, beverage features, food menu features, etc. You should always have one item in detail from both the food and the beverage menus. So these are the standard menus, not the features. You're going to go over the features in detail, but you should not assume that your staff is really solid on all of the main menu items and the main beverage list, because we tend to put all of our effort in communication on a daily basis on the featured items, and people tend to forget about what's on the regular menu sometimes. And we should talk about service and sales principles. You know, food and wine pairing, the principle of giving people options, which is sort of like upselling, but not. Like the simple thing, training people when somebody says, I'll have a vodka tonic, you list a couple of vodkas. The well is this, but we have these. What are you happy with? And they make a choice. That's the modern version of upselling, is giving people choices to spend the money the way they wish. I think that you should always reiterate the vision of your establishment. Whatever it is, you need to say it all the time. You haven't reiterated your vision sufficiently until every employee is actually telling you what the vision is, because maybe they're catching you outside of it, or they're just saying it out loud around you all the time. That's when you know you've said it enough. And until then, you got to say it every day. Positive additions that are not necessarily musts. Positive guest experience of the week. Maybe it's a social media post or somebody that stopped the manager on the way out or stopped at the host stand to talk about what a great time they had. Reiterate it. Who was the server? What did they have to eat? What did they drink? Anything that you can come up with that will reiterate what a great experience is in your establishment. Maybe a less than positive guest experience from which to learn. Here's something that happened yesterday and the person wasn't very happy, and this is what we did instead, and this is why they were not happy, and this is how we can prevent that in the future. Not a calling out and a disciplinary conversation, but a how do we learn from this bad experience yesterday kind of situation. Another positive thing to include in pre-shift is the caught doing good concept, meaning featuring an employee that's standing there as somebody who did something really awesome this week, or was, super diligent about something that is often forgotten. Bringing up and praising people for doing the right things will always reinforce good behavior and will keep them doing good things more than correcting bad behavior. And current events in the industry. Maybe you need to have a conversation about what's going on with COVID right now. Maybe you need to have a conversation with trends inside the wine and spirits industry, or trends in food. Maybe the chef can come out and talk about what's trending in creativity across the culinary world. And last but certainly not least is a team member voice moment. However you structure that, where your team members are doing the talking and you as a manager are doing the listening, because you can learn a lot about your guests and about your team and what they really need when you listen to what they have to say without just waiting to talk. You're truly listening to what's going on. There's a little danger here, as Adam Grant talked about in a podcast I was listening to the day before yesterday. Businesses are not democracies. So when we give our team members full voice, we run the risk of a little chaos. But businesses that express that they hear their employees and that they will then make a decision that acknowledges the obstacles brought up and the concerns, and then they have to make a decision as business leaders as what's best for the business, because in the end, if the business is not healthy, the employees will have worse problems than what they just brought up, because they might not have a job. So great leaders have to decide between what they just heard, what can be implemented, what's healthy for the business, and what they should do about it. But they always make sure that the audience understands that they are listening, and that they have heard the concerns. And that's that, TJ. That's what we should be talking about.
Yeah, I could see that potential there. You'd have to be careful that it doesn't devolve into just a big complaint session about
Right.
like this or that. It's not really. You don't want to say I'm not listening to you, but that's not really the time to go too into it.
Right. And
maybe you continue that offline, as they say.
Right. Yes, you can always divert the conversation for time's sake. And if you have a structure to your pre-shifts, they're going to know I have 1 minute for this. That's all we get. We get 1 minute a day to talk about what's on employees' minds, right? And they'll get used to the idea that it can't just go on and on. But again, that's part of being a manager, is also controlling the situation as needed. All right, so important, so critical. Because I just talked about a lot of stuff. I talked about way more than you can fit into 15 minutes. You have to stay on time. You have to start at the right time and end at the right time. Whatever you pick, you got to stick to it. If you don't get everything in one day and you're like, oh, what a failure, it would be more of a failure to push it 5 more minutes. Just stay on time, because that predictability sets the mind of the employee at ease and the other parts of the business at ease, so that the kitchen's not worried about whether or not you're really going to be ready to serve tables, for instance, because you're still in pre-shift. What are you doing in pre-shift? We're open. Stay on time. Always start, always end at the right time. It's very similar. One of the things that grade school teachers, especially kindergarten teachers, will tell you is the secret of success. And I apologize if I'm making adults sound like kindergartners, but there's that saying, TJ, of everything I ever needed to know I learned in kindergarten, right? Well, one of the things that you learn in kindergarten is that the structure around you puts you at ease and helps you actually learn and thrive. And a completely unstructured environment is very, very difficult for most people. And so the structure that we are talking about with your pre-shift is for the very, very high level benefit of your staff. Be on time. They know what to expect. They are engaged. And then they go back to their work. Because as soon as you have an inefficient meeting, nobody ever wants to have another meeting again. And we have come to the end of the discussion.
So that is the most comprehensive pre-shift meeting that could ever be had.
Yeah, wouldn't that be cool,
cover all of that. Because that is, I'm glad that you made that point at the end, because when I first saw the notes, I was like, this is great, but this is impossible most days. But get the important stuff done. And then if you don't get to the point you were going to make today, do it tomorrow.
Yep. And if you follow a structure, you can do it in 15 minutes, but you have to be disciplined, and everything has to be on time to begin with, right? You can't walk up to pre-shift and they, oh, dang, I forgot the wine I was going to pour for everybody. It has to be there waiting. If there's a dish that's supposed to be sampled by the staff, it has to be there waiting. So it's a team effort. It can't just be the dining room manager that's trying to implement this on their own. It's a total team effort, and everybody has to agree that this is the way we're going to do it.
Yeah, it's almost as if the managers and ownership, or if the ownership's involved in running the restaurant, you have to have your own pre-shift just to plan the pre-shifts.
Yeah, you definitely have to make it part of your management mantras and your management structure. Who's really in charge of it? Where did the ideas come from? What's the order of priorities and discussions, et cetera? Because you can't leave. Well, it's just like meetings in the corporate world, TJ. If I call a meeting and it involves other people and I don't have an agenda and I don't prepare for it, the general experience is poor. We don't get the items covered in the meeting. We don't get to a resolution of whatever questions were on the table, and we probably don't come up with any new good ideas either. So it's no different. We just often forget that the same principle for running a meeting in a corporate setting is the principle for running a meeting in a restaurant or a hotel or a retail.
Sure.
All right. So what are we going to do next time other than take over the world?
What's the 2 weeks from today, August 24th? Proving yourself wrong. That sounds, what's that about, Ron?
Well, it's sort of a follow-up. I'm not going to recover all the information about boldness versus arrogance, but a lot of what happens in the hospitality and retail has to do with lies we tell ourselves. Things like, nobody in my market wants Gruner Veltliner. Or the opposite, which isn't true either. Everybody in my market wants Gruner Veltliner. I have 12, you know? We're going to talk about, in the concept of running hospitality programs, especially when it comes down to beverage choices and menu creativity, we are often telling ourselves things we want to hear, or just proving ourselves right by putting a very limited and poor effort at seeing if something will work. And then it didn't work, so therefore we were right all along, and we move on without changing.
The self-fulfilling prophecy.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of that.
Yep. Humans are good at
it. So join us for that in 2 weeks, August 24th at the same time, as always, 11 a.m. And next week is on the alternating weeks with Preshift, we have the Bordeaux show. Join us for those. And if you want to catch up on any of our past episodes, they are on our YouTube channel, Winebow channel on YouTube. You can watch all the videos and many, many more.
That's correct. Yeah, you can find virtual tastings there, winemaker interviews. There's all kinds of stuff there on that channel.
So check that out and join us every Tuesday at 11 a.m. And until then, stay safe, take care, and have a great day.